بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونستنجده، وأنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم يا رحمن يا رحيم، اللهم يا رب العالمين، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا من كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر. لا إله إلا أنت. The never-ending challenge for every Muslim the never-ending challenge, the constant, ongoing challenge is that we are a people of the book. With all that this statement connotes, like all of Allah's creation, whether knowingly or unknowingly, we submit. The submission to Allah and Allah's will and Allah's power is something that the mountains, the stars, the planets, the earth partakes in. It is a submission of fact, meaning that by the virtue, by the rules, by the very laws of creation, all is in a state of submission to the Lord. Human beings, however, have been given the choice, the ability, either to recognize this submission and to augment it and to develop it and to invest in it, or to deny this submission and be in a state of rebellion. But the very legacy of Muslims, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly reminds us of in the Quran, is that we are the bearers of the book. What that translates into is, as Allah reminds us, for instance, in Surah Al-Hajj, that there are those who speak about the Lord, there are those who represent the Lord's will, there are those who pontificate about their higher power, pontificate about their Maker, pontificate about God without guidance and without a book. In contrast, a Muslim, all Muslims, but the very definition of a Muslim is that they are cognitively fully aware of the fact that their submission is to be developed and engineered in full compliance with, as if an instruction manual with the book that they inherit. How remarkable is it? And indeed, nothing short of a state of cognitive dissonance, a state of disassociation, a paradoxical state, that a Muslim can go through a day after day after day after day in their life. And each day that comes and goes, they could consult the news, they could consult websites, they could consult whatever is broadcasted in all the different mediums of broadcast nowadays. They can subject their consciousness to exposure, to influence, to being directed and engineered in a variety of ways. As a human being in this modern world, that exposure is an ongoing, constant thing. From the minute you wake up, from the minute you turn on your phone, from the minute you interact with anything in the world that we live in. But in all of that, the question that begs itself is, where is the book? Where is the book in our lives? Where is that momentous legacy that you are the people of the book? How could the consciousness, put it in even simpler terms. How much of the day after day, how much of our living day do we actually expose our consciousness, allow our consciousness to be shaped, to be influenced, to be engineered by that specific charge of you are the people of the book? Of course, the book here is Allah's speech, the way that Allah chose to speak to us as Muslims. The lessons of the book are endless and constant. The modern world is constantly bombarding us with every way that distracts the attention and doesn't present us with an easy reconciliation between our existence in our modern world and our role as bearers as bearers of the book, as people of the book. In part, the challenge is indeed psychological. In part, it is philosophical. In part, it is sociological. And in very big part, it is political. How do we interact with our world? Be fully present in our world. Not be in a state of disassociation or a state of unreality in the modern world. How can we be fully present in the moment that we live in, but yet at the same time, not be like those that Allah describes in Surah Al-Hajj, when Allah tells us, من الناس من يعبد الله على حرف, that there are those who exist on this earth. Their relationship with Allah, their relationship with God, is as if on an edge, as if literally on a thin line. If circumstances are conducive to what they like, if things are going in a way that they find satisfying, pleasing, then they are at peace with God, and they speak well about their Lord, and they think good thoughts about their God. And in fact, they might feel that they are close to God. But if challenges arise, if hardship presents itself, if paradoxical states exist that pose a hurdle, they then fall into despair. But what despair here means is they fall into alienation. They become alienated from their Lord. The days will pass, day after day after day, week after week, even month after month, and even perhaps year after year. And in all this time, they might be, and indeed they probably are in all probability, consistently exposed to everything but the book. In other words, because they exist in this relationship of as if on a cliff, literally on a thin line, on an edge. If things are going the way they find tranquil and peaceful, they are, at least what they tell themselves, they are at peace with God. But if things are challenging, they become very easily confused and very easily alienated and very easily turned off, as that expression goes, turned off by the book, by the revelation and what it says. The modern world, especially because of the state that Muslims are in, every day presents us with this same predicament. Last week was yet another example of that. The International Criminal Court The International Criminal Court finally passes an indictment against Netanyahu and General Gallant of the Israeli army. Now, another event in this modern world that presents the Muslim consciousness with so many challenges, especially for those who have followed this case and the different ways that it speaks to us about our modern world. The case, first and foremost, the case against Netanyahu and Gallant and against the Israeli army in general in the International Criminal Court was not brought by a Muslim country. And no Muslim country actually joined the case against Israel. And actually, there is a correction to this. At a later stage, two Muslim countries joined, Bangladesh and Djibouti. Now, of course, you notice that in this, all the countries that you would think of as should be at the forefront of the issue, Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf countries, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, they're all missing from this lawsuit. The lawsuit is brought by South Africa and is joined later on by Bangladesh and Djibouti and other countries, not Muslim majority countries. And the case raises a whole host of things about our modern world. Although you have, under international law, a very clear dynamic, an occupier and an occupied, a force that under international law is in a state of occupation of the other. And all that raises about self-defense and the right to self-determination and the right to liberation. But the International Court, first, although the charges before it were charges of crimes against humanity, of war crimes, of violations of the Geneva Conventions, and the violations of all humanitarian treaties and treaties on human rights. And although there is very good grounds to believe that the crimes being committed are so universal, so egregious, that a country need not be a signatory to the Rome Convention. Now, the Rome Convention is the convention that gives jurisdiction to the International Criminal Court. It's a technical point, but bear with me. The way Israel and the United States responded to the charges being brought is that Israel and the United States took the path of a very technical argument. They said, although there are 124 countries that are signatories to the Rome Convention, Israel is not a signatory to the Rome Convention. And Israel claimed that because it is not a signatory to the Rome Convention, then the International Criminal Court indeed has no jurisdiction over Israel and has no power to pass indictments or even to look at whether Israel is committing war crimes or not. The United States fully supported Israel in this argument, saying that the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction. Israel is not a signatory to the Rome Convention, and because Israel is not, and the United States is not a signatory either, that the court doesn't have jurisdiction. The problem, however, goes much deeper. One, even if Israel is not a signatory, Palestine is a signatory to the Rome Convention. And Israel is an occupation of Palestine. Israel, under international law, is the occupier of Palestine. But even more importantly, the United States and other Western countries have often spoken about war crimes and crimes against humanity when committed by nations like Iraq or Iran or Hezbollah or the Taliban or Russia. They have often spoken as if whether a country is a signatory to the Rome Convention or not doesn't matter, because the crime is so egregious that in law we say that there is universal jurisdiction, meaning that you don't have to be a signatory to the Rome Convention for you to be held accountable for your crimes, because your crimes are so bad. There are crimes against humanity. But when it came to this case, and when it came to Israel, the United States made a complete turnabout. Gone are the arguments about crimes against humanity. Gone are the arguments about universal jurisdiction. Gone are the arguments that human rights are so sacred that if someone violates certain or egregiously violates human rights, that they become an enemy of humankind. Israel and the United States, to this minute, adhere to the hyper-technical point of whether you signed the Rome Convention or didn't sign the Rome Convention. But the ironies don't even stop there. The International Criminal Court, for, in my opinion, clear political reasons, in holding that it does have jurisdiction over the case, issued a rather very narrow ruling. It avoided the issue of universal jurisdiction. It avoided saying that the crimes committed were so egregious that, in fact, you don't need to be a signatory to the Rome Convention. The International Criminal Court said, well, we have jurisdiction because Palestine is a signatory. and Israel is an occupying power. And because Israel is an occupation of Palestine, and because Palestine is a signatory to the Rome Convention, jurisdiction exists. And the International Criminal Court went to great pains to say that we are not just indicting Netanyahu and Gallant, but they even indict a dead person, Muhammad al-Dayf from Hamas, and other Hamas individuals. And you pause and you think of several things at a moment like this. One, the amazing absence of Muslim countries, particularly Arabic-speaking countries, from the picture. Two, some countries like Egypt do and did what they regularly do vis-a-vis their own people and their own citizenry. Egypt went as far as lying to the Egyptian people. Sisi of Egypt tried to give the Egyptian people every impression that Egypt was in fact playing an important role in bringing the charges against Israel in the International Criminal Court. The truth is, however, Egypt played no role, hasn't joined the lawsuit, is nowhere in the picture whatsoever. But if you listen to Egyptian media, the Egyptian government has no qualms about doing what it always does with its own citizenry, lying to them, claiming false victories, and taking their own citizenry for granted, so much so that they don't even bother with the fact that these are easily discoverable lies, and lies that don't take much effort to expose. But even more, you are aware of an American legislation that is rather extremely curious. During the Bush years, Bush the son passed a law that has become known as the Hague Invasion Act, that basically says if the International Criminal Court ever arrests an American to try them for war crimes committed in places like Iraq or Afghanistan, the United States is authorized to invade the Netherlands to liberate the American facing charges. A greater denouncement of the International Criminal Court and the very idea of human rights is not possible. I mean, this is not China, this is not Russia who passed such a law, this is the United States. But then you discover that this law doesn't stop there, but that the law even went further, according by executive directive. In other words, the executive said, the way I'm going to interpret this law is that not only am I authorized to invade, to go to war against the International Criminal Court if they touch an American citizen, but that also includes any major ally of the United States. And by executive directive, major ally like what? Israel and even Egypt. Now, this is the first time that the International Criminal Court has indicted anyone who is pro-Western. All the indictments of the International Criminal Court to date has been basically of the camp that the United States doesn't like. But this is the first time that the International Criminal Court got the guts, and I believe it is simply because of how egregious what is going on in Palestine is. That they knew, the International Criminal Court fully knew, that turning away from this genocide is a death knell to its own legitimacy. No one is going to take the International Criminal Court seriously if they failed to call a spade and say what is going on is criminal. Or at least in the language of the International Criminal Court, there are reasonable grounds to believe that war crimes were committed and crimes against humanity were committed. During the Trump presidency, when the International Criminal Court dared contemplate an investigation into war crimes committed by the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, Trump promptly enforced sanctions against the International Criminal Court and threatened not just the International Criminal Court, but the entire United Nations system if these investigations into war crimes committed by the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq are not promptly dropped. And they were indeed promptly dropped. Now, yet again, there is a bill already introduced in Congress that calls for the sanctioning and the punishing of the International Criminal Court for daring to indict two people who are on record advocating and calling for the extermination of an entire people. As the International Criminal Court itself pointed out, neither Netanyahu nor Gallant made a secret of the fact that they are intentionally starving and displacing the Palestinian people. They made no secret of the fact that they are intentionally obstructing aid to the Palestinian people. At least 10 children have limbs, Palestinian children have limbs amputated every single day in Gaza without anesthesia. At least a minimum of 10 children every single day undergo amputations without anesthesia. And Israel is fully aware of this fact. And this is because Israel will not allow for even something like anesthesia to come into Gaza. And they are fully aware of the famine conditions that they caused. So when the International Criminal Court says that there are reasonable grounds to believe, that's legal speak for Everyone knows. It's obvious. War crimes are being committed. Genocide is being perpetuated. But we are in this dissonant, true cognitive dissonance state of genocide principles being flung around. Our own country in a remarkably hypocritical position where they are fully in support of the International Criminal Court when it comes to indicting Putin, and fully in support of the International Criminal Court when it comes to the Ukraine, and fully in support of UN investigations when it comes to what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but completely dismissive of the same institution, the same court, the same law when it comes to Israel. And not just stopping there, but for the sake of Israel, threatening to invade its own ally, the Netherlands. And for the sake of Israel, threatening to undermine the entire institutional structure of the United Nations and its institutional framework and its jurisprudence. This is not realpolitik. This is not practical pragmatism or political realism. This is an ideological war. One can make many rational arguments why it is entirely defeating for the United States to undermine the institutions of international law and the entire system of human rights, which the United States often leverages against its opponents. But we hit against a wall of ideology where the United States, for purely ideological reasons, think that Israel is worth all of that and even more. But the real predicament and the real issue is that right along with the United States, standing side by side with the United States in its ideological outlook, are the so-called Muslim countries. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, and I could even add to the list Algeria, Syria, are countries that post-Arab Spring no longer see the enemy as anything external to itself. These are countries that no longer even have a passing thought about colonial powers being a threat. They like colonial powers. They befriend colonial powers. These are countries that in no way, shape, or form see Israel as alien or as in any form a threat to themselves. Not even the United States or American imperialism. And in fact, if they worry about Chinese imperialism or Russian imperialism at all, they rely fully and completely on the United States and Israel to protect them from that vague, remote threat of imperialism, even if they perceive it. So these countries, these governments, perceive a very different threat. The never-ending threat, the endless enemy, so to speak, what they are constantly guarding against is their own people. And I will go further and be more specific. It is not just their own people, but more explicitly and more specifically, it is the Islamic heritage specifically, and what the Islamic heritage can do to their own people. And the way that Islam, as Islam once turned people against Quraysh, and once put Muslims in a state of rebellion against the materialism and hedonism and demonic ideologies of Quraysh, all the irrationality and paradoxes and inconsistencies and hypocrisies of Quraysh, they fully recognize the threat that Islam, and when I say Islam, I mean Islamic tradition, as found in those books that represent the Islamic civilization and the Islamic tradition. The Islamic corpus of work, if you will, the Islamic legacy, the Islamic narrative with all its history, all its law, all its philosophy, all its poetry, all its adab, all its everything. They understand that to be the real threat. This is why you read things that truly blow your mind. Listen just to this tidbit. Egypt, with the full acceptance and full cooperation and approval of Egypt, Egypt allowed Israel to carry more than 100 airstrikes, not against Palestinians, but against Egyptian citizens in Sinai. The Egyptian government, Sisi's government, told Israel, go ahead, kill my citizens for me. You use your Air Force, Israel, to kill Egyptian citizens, and go ahead and do it with my full cooperation and blessing. But even more, and this is the part that I want to read, that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt has had and continues to have a very close relationship to Zionist lobbying groups that in February of 2017, Sisi met representatives of the most influential pro-Israel groups, including AIPAC, Friends of Israel Defense Forces, the FIDF, and the Zionist Organization of America, ZOA, 5 times in 20 months. Sisi hasn't visited the United States in a while. But all researchers agree that just like MBZ and MBS of Saudi Arabia and MBZ, Sisi regularly calls upon Zionist organizations, Islamophobic organizations, to advocate for his government in the United States, so that every time human rights organizations try to complain about Egypt's human rights record and try to block aid to Egypt because of its abysmal human rights record, it is not lobbyists hired by the Egyptian government that challenge this blockage and remove it. It is Zionist organizations, pro-Israel, Islamophobic organizations. So the real enemy for all these governments are their own people. And because Islam is the only truly indigenous ideology that is natural for the soil and land over which they rule, they constantly see Islam as a threat itself. So I come to the point where I started. A Muslim wakes up every morning and the challenge is, you, Muslim, you are a man, a woman of the book. The world that you read around you makes the book, the Quran, so far away. It's nearly in this hubris, this mess, all these contradictions. It seems like the Quran is far, far away. And you are not sure in what way am I a person of the book. And that is the real challenge for every Muslim, man and woman, living today. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستغفر لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hajj reminds us that التمكين في الأرض, التمكين في الأرض means when Allah allows you to have any amount, as minimal as it is or as great as it is, of in fact control over your own destiny on this earth. The home that you live in is tamkeen fil ard. The family that you have is tamkeen fil ard. Your relationships, whether it be with a son or a daughter or a parent or a brother or a sister is a tamkeen fil ard. The job that you have is a tamkeen fil ard. Anything you purchase is a tamkeen fil ard. And Allah reminds you that when given this tamkeen, in makkannahum fil ard, what do? Do they eat? Do they dress? Do they drink? Do they enjoy? Well, Allah says, when given this tamkeen, what they do is aqamu salah. They make their existence coexistent or coextensive with iqamat salah, with the act of worshiping Allah. And as the end of Surah Al-Hajj underscores, what else do? They become a constant force for al-amr bil-ma'ruf and al-nahy an-al-munkar, a constant source for espousing what is good and resisting what is evil and immoral and unethical. And then at the end of Surah Al-Hajj, Allah tells us, indeed your role after this tamkeen fil ard, whatever level of tamkeen it is, small or big, is that to discharge the obligation of shahada, to discharge the obligation of witnessing on behalf of God, for God, and witnessing what? Being a force for good and a constant force against evil and against what is immoral and unethical. And that in fact, the Prophet ﷺ bears witness as to his ummah. The role of the Prophet in the final day, when all is said and done, is to see how his ummah has performed. But you as an ummah, your role day after day is the shahada. And in the same surah, Allah tells you that, remember, there are people who make claims and argue and contend all things about God, but they do so without guidance and without a book. Allah constantly reminds you, run to my revelation. Hold on to my revelation. Constantly use my word, my revelation, to remind yourself that you are here on this earth not to satisfy your urges, not to enjoy yourself, not to look after number one or after just yourself, not to indulge whatever that indulgence is, but to bear witness for me, for God. But bearing witness necessitates awareness and seriousness. Can you imagine a witness who understands nothing and comprehends little, and in fact, what they perceive is consistently superficial because they have no basis in knowledge or awareness? Witnessing is a heavy responsibility. But here's all the rub. the more the world and life on this earth presents you with challenges in coherence. In other words, the more you look at this world and you see it as messed up, and the more you see injustices, and the more you see things that simply do not make sense because of how unfair they are, your only salvation, your only repose, your only source of comfort, in fact, your only choice, is to hold on ever more tightly to your role as a witness, because that is what you are. And when you witness for God, your only audience is God. Does it matter that when you bear witness, few people, if any, applaud your testimony? Does it matter that people either approve of your testimony or disapprove of your testimony? It doesn't. Well, the only thing that matters is what Allah reminds you of in Surah Al-Hajj again, at the very beginning of Surah Al-Hajj, when Allah reminds you that whatever you think of this life, be mindful that the hereafter is truly a momentous, overwhelming occasion. That zalzalat as-sa'a, that what you are yet to confront after your death and after your resurrection is going to be the real life, the real issue. And your investment is in your act of shahada, in your act of witnessing. And like everything else, like there are good doctors and bad doctors, good engineers and bad engineers, good lawyers and bad lawyers. There are good witnesses and bad witnesses. If you invest in your act of witnessing, then your witnessing becomes more truthful, more substantive, more real, more objective. It becomes not simply a reflection of your own insecurities and subjectivities, but actually a testimony for what is truthful and right and just. Is this enough? Yes, absolutely. Because Allah made the role of a witness, that task, that job, the most honored and the most revered, and in fact have made it the very purpose of your existence as a human being on this earth. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. اسأل الله يستجب لكم. اللهم اغفر لنا، اللهم اعف عنا، اللهم ارحمنا، اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا رب العالمين. وانصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين، وانصر بفضلك كلمة الحق والدين. Allah, forgive our sins. Allah, aid us, help us to bear the burden of testimony, to become true witnesses in your sake, to understand and perceive correctly so we can be better witnessing, better witnesses, better shuhada in your sake, for your cause, for you. يا الله يا علي يا عظيم وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وآله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأقم الصلاة.